In 1975, when he was about 8 years old, the Khmer Rouge invaded his village and took him to Wat Aik, an old Buddhist temple that was turned into a children's labor camp. He was one of the few who survived near starvation, torment, and murder, eyewitness for 4 years to one of history's greatest atrocities, as we've heard from our other speakers here. When the Vietnamese invaded, the Khmer Rouge forced Arn and other children into battle by slinging guns around their small shoulders. He deserted into the jungles and wound up at a Thai refugee camp where he was eventually adopted by Reverend Peter Pond, who took him and raised him in New Hampshire in the United States. While living in the US, Arn returned to refugee camps to teach and assist those displaced by war, spoke to international audiences and gathered support, and also worked with the Cambodian diaspora in the United States, who had brought the conflict with them, especially the youth, to help them to resolve their conflict nonviolently with their Vietnamese neighbors through dialogue and music. So he started recording studios. A lot of hip hop, which, as many of you probably know, have roots in nonviolence, meaning that, hip hop was started as a kind of put down your weapons and let's battle it out through music and dance. Finally, he returned to Phnom Penh to seek out the master musicians who had survived the genocide, many of them living in poverty and nearly forgotten. So Cambodia not only lost many of its teachers and doctors, but also lost 90% of its artists during the Khmer Rouge regime. And when the war ended in 1979, Cambodian arts and culture were on the brink of being lost forever. So Arn started by looking for the few masters who had survived in a race against time. He helped them to write down the classics, mostly from memory, because all of the scripts had been burned, and got them into recording studios. He encouraged them to teach classes to the next generation. And in the dust and ashes of war and violence, Arn started planting flowers of hope, one by one, year after year. He told me in an interview when I first met him in 2004, in Khmer we have a saying, if you want good fruit, you have to take care of the roots. The young people in Cambodia are forgetting about their 1,500-year-old heritage. They need to know where they come from. Because if they don't know who they are, they won't know where they're going. Today, the organization he founded in 1998, Cambodian Living Arts, is thriving with workshops, training, arts education, and enriching job opportunities for Cambodian performing artists. Arn and the directors of CLA believe that the arts and culture are at the heart of a healthy society. And Cambodia is well on its way to not only building itself back up, but flourishing with a truly inspired spirit. It's examples like Arn's story that give me hope. The arts are incredibly important because they're the reflection of our collective narrative and the very identity of a society. And so they should be valued as such. So my talk today will be in two parts. First, and Rahila might be angry with me on this, but first I am going to give you an introduction to peace and conflict theory as I understand it, so that you can have a strong foundation from which to inform your peace-building efforts. Then, I'm going to give you an example from my own life and work and how we, with Peace Mass Project, implement this theory into practice through the arts. As you're all here at this inaugural Peace Summit of Emerging Leaders, I hope that I'll be able to convey to you the power of the arts in building a sustainable peace, and that you will utilize this power back in your own communities. So, the lecturer in me now wants to ask you that you get a pen and paper ready. Not only to take notes of comments or questions that you might have, but also I'm going to have a little pop quiz in a moment. Before going into a brief lecture about peace and conflict theory, I'd like to take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Kia Kim, and I'm the director of a Japan-based international nonprofit organization called Peace Mass Project. And I'm also a university lecturer of international relations in Kyoto, Japan. So I have a BA in Peace Studies and Journalism and an MA in Conflict Transformation, which is why I'm a theory nerd. Sorry, guys. And have worked for various international organizations, primarily in media and communications, on issues of peace and conflict. My own journey as a peace builder has been met both with victories and setbacks. It's not an easy path to follow, as it's highly personal, with very little in the way of a roadmap. As my mentor, Johan Galton, and many others remind us, one of the key ingredients to building peace is creativity. So you may be gathering by this point that I'm not like the other speakers that we've had the honor to listen to during the past couple of days, in that I haven't experienced war directly. I've also lived a relatively privileged life in that sense, as I believe most of you in this room have also had. In fact, I failed my first Peace and Conflict Studies class. But I'm getting ahead of myself, so let me explain. I was born and grew up in Japan as a Korean American. My mother is Korean and my father is American. I lived in Kyoto until I was 19 and went to the United States at that time for university. I was in my second year as an undergraduate when George W. Bush, who was president at that time, announced that the US would be invading Iraq. I remember that moment sitting in the cafeteria with a bunch of people with our eyes glued to the TV screen, watching this State of the Union in complete shock. there was a heavy silence on all of us until one voice said, "What are we going to do?" Pay attention to that lone voice whenever you hear it. I don't remember who it belonged to, but it remains in my memory because it snapped us awake to our responsibility as university students and also as American citizens to do something. So, we started to organize the first trip from our school to join the protests in Washington, D.C. and New York City. I had just switched my major from creative writing to peace and conflict studies. But I was rarely at school because I was organizing trips to protests, putting together study groups to inform other students and the local community about what was happening. And I also drove all night to attend lectures and workshops by my heroes, Jake Lynch and Annabelle McGoldrick, who pioneered peace journalism, Dr. Johan Galton, the father of peace and conflict studies, Amy Goodman, the founder of Democracy Now!, and others. And eventually I was elected regional coordinator for a national student anti-war group after giving an impassioned speech at an organizing conference. But at the end of the semester, my peace studies professor called me into her office, sat me down, and said very seriously, "You know I can't pass you." I nodded, resigned to the fact that I had not fulfilled my obligation at school. I was surprised, however, when shortly afterwards, I won the National Plowshare Student Peace Builders Award, thanks to her letter of nomination. And I tell you this because I'm forever grateful to Professor Pat Mishi, whose class I did finally get credit for, by the way, who understood the value of the education I was getting outside of her classroom, outside of the educational institution, by following my passion for peace. Even though we were not able to stop the war, I learned valuable lessons about peace and conflict through those very early experiences that still inform my worldview today. I also later learned to embrace theory as an important roadmap for implementing practical solutions for a sustainable peace, which is why I'm now a university lecturer and would like to share some of this valuable theory with you. Following are the bare bones of peace and conflict theory as I see it. Let it inform the peace-building initiatives that you implement as it does mine. So here comes the pop quiz. Get your pens ready. I'd like you to take a moment and write down the first 5 words that come to mind when you hear the word conflict. Okay? When you're finished, take a few minutes and turn to the person next to you. If you don't know each other, it's a good time to introduce yourselves. And please share your 5 words with each other. Take a few minutes right now. Uneducated, whoa, that's interesting. Miscommunication, good. Say it again? Violence. Okay, I'm gonna stop it right there. Thank you very much. All right. So, like the roots of a tree that will break through seemingly indestructible concrete, conflict is an ever-present, naturally occurring process. Conflict occurs when two or more parties have or think they have incompatible goals, issues, or needs. Conflict in and of itself is neither negative nor positive. It's what we do with it that creates more violence or more peace. Therefore, it can be a catalyst for destruction or an opportunity for growth, depending on whether parties to the conflict have the capacity to deal with it creatively and with compassion. This is what we in the peace field call conflict intelligence, and I'm not referring to the CIA. Conflict is not synonymous with violence, although it's very often used interchangeably. A useful visual for understanding violence is the iceberg. Are you all familiar with the iceberg? Okay, that giant piece of ice that floats in the ocean. What is visible above the surface, only a fraction of the whole, is what we refer to as direct violence. Beneath the surface, and far more deadly, are two forms of violence: structural violence and cultural violence. Okay, so let's go into definitions. Just a little bit longer with the theory. Direct violence. Direct violence is immediately visible. It's the visible and intentional harm that is inflicted on an individual or group. So examples of direct violence are bombing, shooting, rape, abuse, both physical and verbal, torture, and bullying. Okay, these are more easy to identify when we see them. Structural violence, just beneath the surface and actually the largest part of that iceberg, the most deadly, can be. Structural violence occurs when people or groups of people are killed or harmed through the systematic prevention from meeting their basic human needs. The systematic prevention. Examples of structural violence are institutionalized laws and education that promote classism, racism, sexism, negative nationalism, as well as military invasion and occupation. Structural violence is the institutions, the scaffolding of a society that give rise to direct violence. And at the very deepest part of that iceberg, cultural violence. Cultural violence is embedded deep in the psyche through collective narratives and belief systems that blind a person or group to direct or structural violence by justifying that violence. Cultural violence can take generations to uproot. The justification is key. Cultural violence justifies through our stories. Examples of cultural violence are legends and myths, origin stories, national anthems, and other narratives that create and demonize an other. It's the us versus them narrative that justifies structural and direct violence. Okay, guys, still with me? Okay, good. So then, what is peace? Peace is not only an absence of direct violence, although we often assume that it is, right? It's a process. It's a process by which the roots of a conflict are addressed and non-violent means for resolving that conflict are discovered creatively, okay? And there are two forms of peace. Okay, we're getting close to the end of this part. So there's the iceberg again. Two forms of peace. Negative peace is a state in which direct violence is put to a halt. In practice, this takes the form of a ceasefire, when both parties put down their weapons, stalemate, or in the victory of one party over another. In other words, a zero-sum game. It's important to recognize that negative peace does not necessarily mean bad, not negative as in bad. It's also very important. Stopping direct violence is crucial and always necessary in every case. For example, peacekeeping forces, they do the work of negative peace. However, while it's important and necessary because it provides much needed relief, the conflict itself is not necessarily resolved. Often, negative peace becomes part of a strategy for parties to regenerate and rearm for their next assault. Structural and cultural violence still lurk beneath the surface, threatening to give rise to an outbreak of direct violence at any moment. Positive peace is a state in which direct, structural, and cultural violence is addressed, if not altogether eradicated, although that's more difficult. This is what is known as a sustainable peace, as this social state takes much longer to achieve, but lasts for a longer period. And peace building, one word, not two, even though your autocorrect will try to separate them. Peace building refers to the work in which cultural and structural violence is identified, analyzed, and conflict transformation initiatives take place to ensure a sustainable positive peace. So peace education, reconciliation and forgiveness, restorative justice, and art for peace are all examples of the many approaches to peace building. And by conflict transformation, I mean creative relationship building to try to find new and often unexplored pathways to reconciliation and positive peace. So, art is an extremely effective tool for conflict transformation and sustainable peace building because it is by definition rooted in culture at the very deepest level of human experience. So that's a pretty good setup to talk about Peace Mass Project, right? So let's get into Peace Mass Project. Okay. In the year 2000, Peace Mask Project founding artist Myung-hee Kim turned 50, marking 25 years in Seoul, Korea, where she was born, and 25 years in Japan. And she's here, by the way, if you'd like to talk to her in person. You may be aware of the history of conflict and violence that exists between the two countries. And so for Myung-hee, this birthday marked not only a personal significance, but a larger historical meaning. And as an artist, she set out to express it to the world. She launched on a journey to seek out Japanese and Korean individuals who would offer their name and their face as a symbol of reconciliation and friendship between the two countries. With the help of countless volunteers, supporters, and organizations who believed in and shared this vision, she began to make the impressions of each face from traditional handmade papers. The paper is washi paper, which is made from mulberry fibers and has been used for thousands of years across East Asia. In Japan, it's considered sacred, so there are purification ceremonies where the monks will wear robes made out of washi paper. It's really beautiful. The washi we use comes from Echizen in Fukui Prefecture in Japan, where artisans have made this particular type of paper by hand for centuries. During a period of 2 years, 27 workshops in various locations in the two countries were held, and the masks of 1,580 individuals, Japanese and Korean, were shown at the final exhibitions in Seoul and Yokohama to coincide with the 2002 World Cup Games, which were co-hosted by the two countries that year. So this is an image from the final exhibition in Yokohama. Whenever I see these masks in person, and please do take a moment before you leave today to have a look at those masks, I'm always struck by how unique each individual mask is. There truly are no two faces alike. And yet, when you step back and view the mural as a whole, it's not possible to identify the nationality, gender, age in some cases, of each face. The masks, through the magic of art, were able to display that part of our humanity that cannot be divided. Whenever we hold a Peace Mask workshop, many people appear to support and participate. And this is completely community run. For 18 years, it's all been community funded. We do everything ourselves. And yet, a spontaneous community seems to pop up around this small initiative, bringing together a diversity of people from different backgrounds, cultures, and ages to share with each other in real time through the slow process of art. It's not fast, it's really slow. So you have to talk, and you have to get to know each other, because you spend so many hours together. Not only do we make masks together, but we have meals together, and we learn from each other through respectful dialogue. It's a platform. So this is a photo from earlier this year. We did a project in Cambodia. We partnered with a local organization called Women Peacemakers. They're a very inspiring, very small, but super dedicated conflict transformation org. And they were doing a project with 15 different ethnicities, young people from around Cambodia, to try to listen to each other in dialogue and try to get a sense of what the Cambodian identity is. And so they invited us at the end of their 1-month session to do a peace mask project with them. This is in Japan, Moriyama High School. These were Japanese high school students and Chinese students who, you may know that there's quite a heavy conflict right now, tense conflict between the two countries. So we brought together students who couldn't even speak with each other because they didn't share a common language. But through art, they were able to really get to know each other and to spend time together. That was quality. And this last one is part of our Peace Mask East Asia project, which is ongoing. These are Japanese, Chinese, and Korean students at my university in Kyoto. So the mask-making process itself is a platform for personal meditation, a moment of self-reflection. This is plaster that's applied to the face to make a mold. So it's quite frightening. And we have had people who have experienced PTSD feel very uncomfortable. We need to prepare them for this process, oftentimes. Because the plaster is applied over your whole face except for 2 straws to breathe, and that plaster hardens. And a few people have described it as being buried alive, and then when it's taken off, it's like a rebirth. You can't speak and you can't see. And when we're working with people who have experienced some violence or maybe some pretty tense conflict, if they're in the same room together, we have them touch each other and talk to each other through the whole process. So a divided world creates more insecurity and fear. And fear too often results in violence. Trust is the courageous act of being the first to break through that fear and reach out to the other. You may have noticed those peace masks displayed at the back of the UN conference hall here. These are the peace masks of 100 hibakusha, or nuclear bomb survivors. They're all living models, although unfortunately a couple have passed since we held the project last year. They're ages 92 to 8 years old, and the project was launched as a recognition of the 73 years of devoted efforts by the Hibakusha anti-nuclear weapons movement and the awarding of the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize to their call for peace. We included 8 non-Japanese hibakusha of Korean, Chinese, and American nationalities because those nationalities were represented in Hiroshima and Nagasaki as well, to demonstrate that nuclear weapons are a global threat. It does not discriminate by nationality. This photo was taken at the final event at the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park and Museum in March of 2017 with some of the participants. So here are some of their messages for you all. This is Atsuko Kobayashi, a first-generation survivor, who says, "I was 1 year and 7 months old when the bomb was dropped. Our house was 2.6 kilometers from the epicenter and completely burned. Nuclear weapons are the devil's weapon. I pray for their abolishment while I'm still alive." Shigenari Kenji, a second-generation survivor, says, "Here in Hiroshima, we preserve the memories of survivors and will continue to pass on the importance of peace so that we may never repeat this tragedy." And finally, Yuki Kawasaki, a fourth-generation survivor, says, I feel gratitude to be here, to be alive. I'm thankful to my parents for passing on life to me. Thank you, grandmother and grandfather. Thank you, ancestors. Most of all, thank you to all the people who survived an era of hardship. I will live today and tomorrow fully. I will cherish the life I have been given. And I have here, can you guess whose face this is? Someone in the room. I think she's in the room. So this is Rahila's peace mask. Rahila is here? No, huh? Ah, there she is. Yeah, Rahila went through the peace mask process with us last night. So if you'd like to have a look, please come up and I'll show this to you. And with Yuki's message of gratitude in our hearts, I wish you, today's generation and tomorrow's leaders, all of the support and encouragement you will need to build a sustainable, positive peace. Be that lone voice that calls for action when you see violence. Do the work to develop conflict intelligence. And above all, remember that creativity is the key to peace building. So live artfully. Thank you.
To what extent you believe that nuclear weapons and mutually assured destruction have contributed to worldwide peace?
To what extent nuclear weapons and mutually assured destruction have contributed to worldwide peace? Personally, I don't even understand the question because I can't see how they can contribute to peace. They are the most horrifying invention made by humanity. And I understand your question as a kind of mental exercise, but in truth, I would prefer their abolishment immediately.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
One shall also give words of appreciation for the presentation. Indeed, it was very fruitful and educating. Mine is to just give a few comments and then a question thereafter.
Okay.
My name is Sipepe Mthembu from South Africa, representing Durban University of Technology. You see, in South Africa, we once went through apartheid. Now, during apartheid, you'll find it very interesting that we had males and females whom contributed towards us as South Africans attaining democracy. But after apartheid, it's only rare that you find females being recognized as icons that positively contributed in South Africans attaining democracy. Mine then is to pose this question to you. Do you think the world at large is doing justice in recognizing females like yourself and other speakers that have come forward to share their stories, in recognizing them through the positive contribution that they are continuously making in the society at large? Thanks very much.
Thank you. My response to that is that meeting gentlemen like yourself that would ask such a question is a very good sign. Yeah, and I think that we are making progress. And I hope that, I believe that there's a lot of conflict transformation that has to occur between the genders as well, in order for us to be able to create that equitable society. We have a history of violence for both sides, or all sides if you include other genders. So, but I'm hopeful, and thank you for your question.
No, thanks very much.
So your speech is very inspiring for me. And my question is, how would you encourage other people to find their creativity within themselves? Because there are a lot of people who think they are not creative at all, or at least they believe that they don't have any sense of art.
Yeah. That process can be frightening. We might feel intimidated to unlock our own potential as a creative. But I think that it's a matter of going back to it again and again. And depending on where you are in your own creative journey, finding others that inspire you with their creativity is a really good place to start. And learning about the arts and learning about different types of arts and seeing what suits you. And playing. I think playing is really important. Just don't take it too seriously. I'm a lot in my head, as you can tell. So, you know, for me, art and playing in that way is really, 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 really important. So maybe for you as well, I'm not sure.
Hi, my name is Hyeon Lee. I'm from South Korea. I represent a organization, a firm called Merrimond. I don't know if anyone's heard of it. We are a art-inspired design lifestyle goods maker. We design lifestyle goods based on the life stories of the 200,000 women who were victims of Japanese military wartime crimes during World War II. I'm a former management consultant. I have worked in the business world, but I am a huge art lover, which is why I was interested in social impact, but also the arts, which is why I've joined this company as CSO and CFO. I've traveled to many countries. This year I've traveled to several countries promoting our message of peace. But next week I'm going to Japan to address this issue with Japanese citizens. And I'm a little concerned about the kind of audience that I'll be facing next week, especially in the era of Shinzo Abe and his government. I'm wondering what I should expect next week.
Mm-hmm. You know, one of the things that helps when we're looking at conflicts like that is to disaggregate the conflict, meaning don't make it a Korean-Japanese issue. Find Koreans living in Japan or Japanese who lived in Korea during the occupation that maybe identify as Korean. Find communities around the issue that can just disaggregate it a bit. And that should lead to a lot more support in being able to talk about very, very difficult issues for you. And of course, you can also come visit us in Kyoto. Be very happy to talk with you about that afterwards. And best of luck.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was wondering if that could effectively be reversed and argue that creativity is also not necessarily key, but a necessity in conflict as well.
I went to Berlin last year and saw the buildings built by the architect for the Nazi regime. And it was magnificent in the most horrific sense, you know, because they made these buildings really huge to make you feel very small. It was brilliant, brilliant creativity. And the Nazis had this incredible use of imagery. So I completely agree with you. And when I was working as a journalist, I often talked about propaganda for peace. Propaganda for peace. So it can be used in both senses, right? That's a joke, by the way. I don't encourage propaganda. I'm just saying that, yeah, absolutely, it can be used in both ways. And hopefully, the intelligence, the conflict intelligence, being able to analyze all levels of violence will lead to creating things that maybe will hopefully create peace. Yeah.
I was just curious to know how you stayed motivated to continue your path on studying peace and conflict resolution after you passionately protest against the Iraqi war. How did you stay motivated? Because I feel, personally, I would feel so demoralized after working so hard but still seeing the war go ahead.
Yes. There were two things. One was that I did have a kind of burnout after that activism. And one of the things that I realized was that we were so angry. you know, trying to stop that war. And at those protests, it was always anti-war, anti-this, anti-that. And I just felt exhausted. And I thought there has to be other answers. I had a lot of questions that weren't answered through protesting and through my activism at that time. And that's when I came to Johan Galton, who's an incredible mind, brilliant professor, now in his 80s. But he gave me the blueprint for understanding what I was experiencing and didn't have words for. That, and also, so I went into, instead of anti-war, I went into conflict transformation, peace building, and all this stuff. And also I went on the Peace Boat, which is a Japanese organization that travels around the world by boat, visiting different places as the onboard journalist. And that introduced me to all kinds of cultures and all kinds of ways of thinking. That helped open up my mind as well, and to give me a lot of motivation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, I'm a trained classical dancer, and I'm very much interested in what you just spoke. And right now I'm working on production where I use the literature composed by Muslim poets in the praise of Hindu gods.
Wow.
And I find that sometimes, as they can be uniting factor arts, they can also be very effective tool to divide people.
Towards?
To divide people.
Oh, to divide
yeah.
people, okay.
So for example, there is this huge row going on from last few years, Thai and Khmer classical dance, where each country say it belongs to us. So what will you suggest about that?
Yeah, I really don't know how to answer your question because I'm not familiar with that conflict.
But how about other countries? In other contexts.
How to deal with
the
fact that creativity can divide people?
Yes, yes.
Use creativity to bring them back together. It's simple.
Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Fabiola. I'm from Nicaragua, and I'm currently studying my master's degree in Macquarie University in Australia. My question was actually referring to the same question in the mention in here, so I'm going to rephrase it a little bit. My initial question was, what could have you done differently back in the moment of protest, seeing that it didn't work, and what happens in the case of a protest being brutally repressed? What kind of creativity or how can such violent conflict be addressed?
I think that protests or demonstrations, in the sense that you join together with like-minded people and you demonstrate that you will not put up with this violence, is really important, as frustrating as it is. And I do also understand that in some cases that can be violently oppressed, in which case there has to be other strategies in the meantime, I think, for peace building. So you have to be very flexible when violence is so visceral and it's really in your face. I think, which again, I haven't experienced that personally, but I have many friends who have, and I think maybe you have some personal experience in Nicaragua now. So, finding other strategies, and also, I'm worried that I'm not answering your question as best I can, but for example, Israeli and Palestinian conflict. A lot of times, the peace building and dialogue has to happen outside of that region. So you can find allies in a neutral place that can help you to set up dialogues, which is important. When I was protesting, I never thought that I would ever understand the military person's perspective. And I shared this a little bit with Derek today, but for a few years, I taught in the Japanese military, with the self-defense forces, and that dialogue taught me so much that I realized I had no idea. That was a kind of blinder for me. So if you can do that somehow, Yeah. We
Thank
can,
you.
let's talk more after.
Yes, that
Okay.
would be interesting. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I know my question will be a bit of a downer, but I just want to ask a bit more about peace resolution and conflict. So you know how you mentioned systemic violence and how it's about how violence is perpetrated in the community through the systemic oppression of peoples through certain inequalities and gaps. I just want to ask, do you think it's possible to achieve lasting peace despite the wealth inequality that's endemic to a lot of capitalist societies today? Like, is it feasible to answer the sort of inequality and solve this systemic violence? So I just want to ask, is it ever possible to address this form of systemic violence?
Is it possible
within-
to address it?
Yeah, how can we address it?
Oof. Oh, you're really putting me on the spot here. I don't know. Are there ideas in the room? This one's tough. I'm trying to think of examples where that might have happened, but they're not coming to mind. Also, I'm getting a little bit tired, so I'm sorry. So addressing systemic violence of the disparity within
Yeah,
of
like
classes.
wealth disparity and class disparity. That's present in a lot of societies today.
And you're from China.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not.
Yeah,
You know, I'm
just
not
don't
putting
worry.
the two together. I'm just trying to think if I know any examples from China, but I think that addressing laws that are unjust, the systems, promoting peace education to address these issues, taking it into the classrooms, addressing laws that are unjust, when you can to stop those laws or to change those laws through politics. Media is very powerful in affecting kind of cultural change. So when you can, try to put a different story in the media. Yeah, I don't know what else to say about that one.
My name is Zachary. I'm from the United States. I actually go to school and live in New Hampshire.
Oh.
So one of the degrees that I'm studying is Holocaust and Genocide Studies. And actually this morning I did my senior capstone presentation over FaceTime on the representation of trauma using different types of art forms such as hand drawings from Holocaust survivors, memorials created by
Yes.
individuals post-Holocaust, and also movie clips using film itself and like footage itself, real-time footage, and then using creative film. And I just wanted to know your opinion on the importance of using these types of art forms and these types of representation of legacies, responsibilities, and activism and stuff like that within these courses and in this worldwide study of these mass atrocities and these past, present, and future ways of creating peace, and whether or not we should strive to live to the model to learn, to teach, and to prevent.
But I think that you answered your own question. I mean, you're obviously very passionate about the importance of all of these wonderful examples that you just gave. One that I'm actually now just starting to become interested in is heritage and memorial, you know, and the importance of that. So I live in the old Japanese capital of Kyoto City, and a lot of our heritage sites are made out of wood and are decaying and falling apart, but to preserve heritage is so, so important, both to understand who we are, but also to build peace. So, yeah, I mean, all the examples and more that you are going to do now that you've finished your capstone are fantastic, and I totally wholeheartedly support it.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Hi, my name's Alexi. I'm from the University of Queensland in Australia.
okay.
And I'll just keep this quick. But basically, the Japanese government's current position on these comfort women during World War II, no evidence was found that the Japanese army or the military officials seized the women by force. So do you think is this position a key obstacle to peace building between Korea and Japan, do you think?
Yes, and so is the position of the opposite side. So the position of all sides that create a barrier to understanding and to dialogue is a problem for peace building, absolutely. Yeah, we actually did a Korean conflict series with Peace Mouse Project and worked with some of the comfort women. They're just like the hibakusha, they're grandmothers. They're really, really old. And they have a story to tell. And I think that the pity is that while these governments are arguing about whether or not it happened, the women who actually experienced it are getting older. It's like, why don't you talk to them? You know? So yeah, I think that type of kind of stubborn positionalism is dangerous. It's dangerous. It prevents dialogue.
Okay, cheers.
It's not involving any armed violence, but how to make sense of what's going on with all the ambiguity that's covering it. So how to tell who's right and who's wrong under these circumstances. I'm living in UAE, and I don't think that they are right in what they are doing, and I don't think that the Qataris are responding in the best way possible to it. Everyone is just playing diplomacy, and I just want to have your take on it.
Yeah. Again, I don't know too much personally about this context and this conflict. I would love to talk with you further. But one thing that sticks out in what you said is this who's right and who's wrong. This is usually the official stance. This is politics, right? Well, you're right, or you're wrong, and I'm right. Not only politics, actually, in interpersonal conflicts as well. We always do this.
Yes.
But that's a zero-sum game. There's only going to be one loser and one winner. And it's never a fully resolved issue. So I think that's where you can start, is thinking about, how can we both be right and both be wrong? And how can we find that pathway by understanding where we're right and where we're wrong? And trusting that the other one can also come to that openness.
All right. So the willingness to have an open dialogue is necessary for
It
reaching
depends
a
on the
resolution.
context, really. This is for yourself, I guess, and for myself when I'm thinking about all of these things. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Okay, delegates, this will be our final 5 questions before we end the session. Thank you.
Hello, my name's Quinn. I'm from Newcastle, Australia, studying politics, international relations. I'm quite inspired by the idea of art as a means to engage children and young people in peace building and other social issues. And I guess I'm curious on your perspective on how to do so when it comes to sensitive and complex issues such as nuclear and weapons non-proliferation or war. Or systemic racism and issues of that nature.
With children?
Yes, yeah, with children that perhaps may otherwise not feel like they have a place in that broader context.
Australian children?
I guess internationally.
Internationally?
As well. Yeah.
And how old are they?
I guess any age, yeah. So speaking from the idea of younger children that may not necessarily have a place in that conversation at such point, but also young teenagers and people are starting to get an idea of worldly issues.
And which issue specifically do you want to focus on?
I'm not sure. Sorry. I guess issues which maybe they're not directly related to, but feel like perhaps they can be as far as solidarity with their fellow humans.
Okay, so some distance, like the nuclear issue.
Perhaps so, yeah.
How can you make that more immediate for them through art, do you think?
I guess that's my question. Sorry.
Yeah.
I guess my interest lies in using it as a tool to connect with younger people, but also doing so in a way that doesn't alienate them and makes them feel like they are just as much a part of a solution.
I think that if you are the facilitator, then it has to be an art form that you enjoy doing and that you find meaningful. And once you find it meaningful and you enjoy it, and you bring people together, you will spread that. You know, it's going to happen. There's a magic in art that you can't predict and you can't plan for. As long as it's something that you love and you share that love with others, then you'll find the way. I'm sure of it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Due to the interest of time, I'll just jump straight into my question.
Okay.
So I would like to ask, how do you feel about the fading heritage and voice of the minorities, voice of the survivors, in the wake of everything that's happening so far? Because we're currently helpless in coping with so many things that are happening right now.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about this?
I actually teach a class called Art as a Tool for Representation and Peace Building. And what we do is we look at minority groups and how art can become a very powerful tool to get their message across when there is no dialogue. So I'm personally very interested in street art as an art form, and how that can be used as almost like a billboard, a city billboard, to get minority voices heard. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Basically, I'm just kind of wondering more from a journalism standpoint. We talk a lot about this conference, about dialogue and sharing ideas and opinions. And I guess with the way the media is currently portrayed, and as well with this idea of like an echo chamber effect, that the way social media works, you often like something, you only see what you like, and you start to see more polarisation on both sides of politics. I guess in terms of contributing towards peace rather than conflict, what role and what strategies can journalists do to help bridge the gap between opinions and help kind of encourage the sharing of conflicting opinions? Because I think often we try to think it's about agreeing, but I think it's more about understanding. So I guess like, what do you think on all of that?
I think that number one, the responsibility of a journalist is to analyze the conflict down to its cultural violence. So this is something that most media is if it bleeds, it leads. They focus only on the direct violence, and a lot of foreign correspondents will fly into a conflict, report on how many were killed, and then fly out. There's no relationship. But as a journalist, your subjectivity is important. You're taught to be objective, but actually you're not. And your presence in a conflict will have an effect. So owning your subjectivity, and then developing the intelligence to analyze the conflict as a whole, and then, if possible, proposing solutions for a sustainable peace in your reporting is one thing that you could do as a journalist, I think.
Thank you.
Actually, my grandpa was a local artist, and he's been through several wars. The Sino-Japanese War, which is World War II, known by most of you, and the Civil Chinese War. And actually, one day he told me one of his viewpoints about nuclear weapons. He said, nuclear weapons around the world, he thinks, is the terroristic piece. Because he said, like every superpowers, they have nuclear weapons, right? Like once a country bombed another countries, the other country will also bomb back as against. But like if that happens, the whole world will end because the powerfulness of the nuclear weapon. So as a consequence, no countries will use that, but they will still manufacture that, but as a threat to the whole world. Well, back then I was little, and I think his viewpoint it's reasonable. But like as I grew up and get more knowledge, I found like I can't find the logic behind this kind of like terroristic piece, because like terroristic is terroristic, peace is peace. I think these are two separate and a concept against with each other. And I want to hear from you, like how would you refute this viewpoint? Thanks.
How do we what?
I mean, to rebut against this viewpoint, because I know you clearly, you don't, you are not an advocate for the nuclear weapon, right?
Yeah. And that was a very impassioned and wonderful speech you just gave, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I'm completely, terrorism, I think you're right, absolutely. And especially because nobody talks about the nuclear accidents that are just waiting to happen, and that have almost happened many times in history.
Yeah.
So, yes, absolutely, it's a blight on our planet that is very, very, very dangerous and volatile that needs to be needs to be gotten rid of.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.